This is Mustafa Sadiq at MIMS. Thank you all for joining today. I just had a couple of housekeeping items before I turn it over to Randy. First, I pasted a link to an attendance form in the chat box. If you could click on that and navigate whenever you can over, just so we can get a roster for who attended the class. Today we'll be presenting. Rick will be presenting, and then and Randy will do the introduction. That'll be followed by a moderated Q&A session, kind of like last time if you attended. We'll take questions from the chat box, and then we'll turn it over to the phone. If you're on the phone, to unmute yourself, you have to press *6 during the Q&A session, and then if you're on the computer, you can just hit the icon, the microphone icon in your web browser, and you'll be able to unmute yourself. And with that, I'll turn it over to Randy.
Thanks, Mustafa. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. You can see on the screen the title of today's presentation, Managing Critical Incidents in an Upside-Down World, Innovative Approaches to Crisis Support. In this session, this group of presenters are going to talk about some of their experiences and the unique methods that they're utilizing to assist people during this very unprecedented situation for all of us. So the speakers today are Dr. Rick Ottenstein, CEO of the Workplace Trauma Center, Sergeant Chuck Hart from Baltimore County, Maryland Police Department, Captain Nikki Hewer from Westminster Police, Amy Baker, Program Director from Carroll County, and then Eric Bonney, Regional Coordinator, also works with Rick at the Workplace Trauma Center. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with Rick's presentation.
Okay, thank you. So my goals for this presentation are that we will share some experiences we've had in developing critical incident and other support approaches that have had to be modified, of course, because of the social distancing. We're then going to ask, at some point in this presentation, we're going to ask all of you to share your strategies and experiences. Those of us that are presenting by no means have come up with all the ideas that are possible. And what I'd really like all of us, including myself, to get out of this presentation are acquiring new skills and strategies. So please, please, please think about what you can share as we go through this. And when we come to the point for the sharing, please jump in. And then we're also going to talk about helpful hints and providing effective interventions that we've encountered through trial and error as we've gone through this. So my piece is going to be to talk about general virtual support. And my organization, the Workplace Trauma Center, works with a lot of EAPs and government agencies. And we've been getting a lot of requests to consult, to develop approaches, and then also to deliver them. So we've been working pretty full tilt and are pretty exhausted developing these. So wanted to share with you some of the things we've developed that we've put into place. And then we're going to talk about some of the things the other folks on the presenter list have created and encountered. So scheduled support. Typically with critical incident teams, we respond when something has happened. And in this circumstance, there's a lot of opportunities to schedule support because this is an ongoing critical incident, if you will, that is constantly impacting people, both personally and professionally. So one of the things we're doing are large-scale brief stress check-ins. This is for an EAP that requested that we develop this with them. And so what this is, it's open to anyone that's covered under that EAP benefit, and it's offered nationally and even internationally. So we can have anywhere from 400 or 500 people coming in, or even more if that's the case. We haven't had that many just yet, down to 7 or 8, depending on the time of day and the needs, and how widely it's publicized within the organizations. So the structure of the stress check-in is there's a moderator, the support person, the presenter, so to speak, and then everybody logs in but are muted and will anonymously submit questions that they have. So it's really kind of a question and answer program. The moderator has questions in hand if nobody starts presenting questions right away. The ones that we have been doing have been half-hour sessions. So they're scheduled multiple times a week and at different times during the day. And for this organization, they are offered in 3 different formats. The first is open to anyone within that's covered under that EAP from any kind of business or agency. So it's a general support. The second one is for healthcare organizations. This EAP has maybe 150,000 employees that they provide support for in the healthcare field. So we have exclusive ones just for healthcare providers. They're also a half-hour in length. And then the third one that we're doing, and we're actually having the first one tomorrow, are grief check-ins. And anybody covered under this EAP can log into the grief check-in, and this format is pretty much the same. So those are the brief, large-scale check-ins. We're also doing small group check-ins. These are specifically for a smaller group. The format's pretty much the same, but if a small group of employees want to have a stress check-in, that can be a bit more effective because people can get more of their own questions answered. One of the challenges in doing these stress check-ins is the fact that getting people to put in the questions. So if you structure anything like this, really encourage in your publication of it that you need the questions. Have questions on hand to throw out if nobody's putting in questions. Have an opening and closing statement. The next type are team support meetings. And these are more like what we would typically do in the field, but it's all being done virtually. So a team requests support. We've been doing some for healthcare clinical teams and also administrative teams. We schedule it for the ones we've been doing have been either half-hour or hour. That seems to be the time frame that most people are looking for. Particularly in healthcare, people are so busy that taking long periods of time and they're so exhausted doesn't seem to work well for them. So a team that's having a need can have a virtual support meeting. This one is open video and audio with people muting and unmuting as they speak. The large scale stress check-ins, like I said, are only the presenter and the moderator can be heard. So the team support meeting is allows for people to talk and discuss what they're going through. And then there's open support hours. So these would be specific hours where the video is open and people can come and go as they please. We haven't actually done any of these yet, but this is another possible way of doing this. And then support groups. Support groups that are converted from in-person to virtual support. So if you were doing a support group previously, a lot of those are moving to virtual support using a platform such as Zoom or Google Meets. Then unscheduled support can be by request, telephonic requests, and web-based request forms. So we got a request by a large organization literally 2 days ago that they wanted to have support available for their personnel, and they needed it in place by the next day, which is kind of challenging to do. But we were able to put it together where the requests come in either telephonically, which we set up a dedicated line, or they come in through a web-based request form that we set up, and the link is shared with all employees. We're asked to provide a counselor for them within same day or 24 hours at the latest. So that is just another way of providing support. So I'm going to move on. So the next piece on our agenda are what we're calling, for the purpose of this presentation, hybrid approaches. So we're thinking of a hybrid approach referring to combining video conferencing with live group attendance. And the circumstances have basically dictated that be done. And so Nikki Hewer and Amy Baker did one for the Westminster Police Department in terms, I guess I put debriefing. It was really a diffusing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was more of a diffusing.
Yeah, okay, so it's a hybrid diffusing. And then the second one is hybrid grief support, which Eric Bonney did with a group of employees from a company that had just lost someone. So I'll ask Nikki and Amy to jump in at this point and talk about the situation and how it was structured and what you encountered, as well as what you would do different and any hints that you have for people.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Rick?
I can.
Okay. So I'll just give you a brief background of what happened on our end. We had an officer-involved shooting. 5 of our officers fired upon an individual with a rifle. So we brought all 5 of those officers in. We had 2 other officers that were witnesses. And then obviously our dispatchers were impacted as we had an open mic during the shooting. So because of social distancing, we had to spread all of our folks out. So we had the 5 officers that were involved in the immediate part of the shooting in a larger room together. The 2 officers that were witnesses were in a separate room, and then the 2 dispatchers were in a separate room. And at that point, obviously from our perspective, from the police department end, we really wanted to have an in-person response. Obviously, probably more so because those were my officers, and it just felt more personal to have people in person. So myself and Amy co-coordinate the team here in Carroll County, and of course, Amy was unable to respond, as were many others, because of wonderful COVID. So we did a hybrid response where all of those individuals were involved in the actual diffusing in separate rooms. So Amy, I'll let you, we had 2 officers that actually did respond in person for the hybrid end. So Amy, I'll let you take over as far as the actual diffusing itself.
Okay. Thank you, Nikki. So basically, because of the fact that I work for a health department and was not permitted to respond in person, we decided that there were 2 officers who were actually on duty from other agencies who were able to respond in person. And then we used a video chat platform similar to this. And I was on video. Now, here was the challenge, is that in the big room, there was not a computer with a video camera capacity. So they could see me, but I could not see them. So that was a bit challenging. And then there were staff, officers and dispatchers in other rooms Some were able to get on via their cell phones, and some were just on via phone. So it was truly a hybrid of people who were calling in, people who were on video, and people in the room. And what I really counted on were the officers who were in the room to clue me into anything that they were seeing as the eyes in the room, and to make sure that they were really checking in with each person before, during, and after the intervention, so that we knew if there was anybody who was showing any particular signs of that were concerning, that we needed to do follow-up with, or just maybe needed a little bit longer that night. So, you know, it worked. I think the feedback that I've gotten from Nikki, from her officers, was that it was beneficial. Things that we would do differently would be, I think, planning for something like this so that we can have more people on camera, because seeing people is as important as hearing people. But I think for the fact that we had to put together an intervention that night, really within about an hour and a half, I think we did a really good job, given those limitations.
See, I'll just say that not being a fan of the virtual response from the beginning, that I had seasoned officers, I had brand new officers that had just graduated from the academy in August. I had one officer who came to us from Baltimore City. This was his first day off of field training with us, where he was on his own. And having the variety of officers that we had, and dispatchers included, everybody was very happy with the response and felt like they were well taken care of. So I think overall it went really, really well.
Yeah. And then there was a lot of follow-up. Nikki, you can say from your end, you did quite a bit of follow-up with them throughout the following days.
Yeah, especially the 5 officers that were immediately involved in the shooting. I followed up with them every day, and actually I still talk to them every day because, of course, they're on administrative leave. Just checking in with them and their families, making sure that none of them need anything from us, and they all seem to be doing very well.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. All of us that do critical incident work, we've for many years been doing the best we can with whatever circumstance we find ourselves in, and nothing's ever been perfect. But this situation is quite challenging, but it sounds like you made the best of it. And that's what we're all doing. But a lot of good ideas and your experience will help us to do it better when we find ourselves in that situation. I think the nice thing about hybrid debriefings is you can get more service there, whether we're sheltered in place or not. I know I've worked with the airlines over the years, and one of the real challenges for the airlines is getting people together. And you often cannot do face-to-face debriefings because they're traveling all over the world. So utilizing this technology, refining it, developing protocols that make it as effective as possible is really going to be helpful for the future for a lot of different industries. So next we have Eric Bonney, who did a brief support group virtually for a company. And Eric, you can describe the circumstances and go on with sharing your experience.
Sure, thanks, Rick. As Rick indicated, these are with EAP programs. The one I'm referring to just happened on Monday with a major hospital system in a major metro area. And it happened to hospital staff who had a 30-year employee, and the employee had just retired, became infected with corona, came back to the hospital, was then treated there and passed away there within a couple of days. All of her employee colleagues, friends could not be with her. during that time, which made it, the impact is really there, as we can see across the United States. In reality, then, what I did is I had to first assess the situation. It was over the weekend, seeing what equipment was available. With virtual, you really have to see what they have available and then how you can get the communications across in the best way, and hopefully get feedback from them. As Amy has indicated, you can have issues. In this case, I had no video view of them. They could hear me, and I had to have them talk through a moderator on site who could repeat questions to a cell phone, which we worked out because they didn't have a good audio setup there. So you have to remember to be adaptive to these situations when they pop up, and shift in the equipment you may have in trying to adjust to that. I had about 60% participation in this, which is pretty good. Hearing their questions, their comments is very important, I think, in the two-way communication you can have. The other thing I think that's important in looking at this and looking at grief, of course, is the grief overlay that's there with traumatic impact. So I developed a short PowerPoint, knowing that they may or may not be able to see me or hear me. I try to think of a variety of ways, and also a way of getting across to them in the best way I could. I really feel when you have audio, you can do things, and I think it's helpful to be a little more animated in getting your voice in there. If it's only verbal, you can come in and out on your mic and get your point across. So I think it's important to use a variety of approaches when you're trying to reach people when they can't see you and they can only hear you, for instance. But if they can see you, I also have a poster board right here. I could put some displays on if they, there's something that applies to their situation too. So in this, I also talk to them about the layers. In a sense, there's layers of the overall pandemic and then their situation. So grief process with them and overall grief process for everyone. There was also one last week I did. It was across 3 states for a national pharmaceutical company. And reaching them, I could not hear them at all. So we worked out the chat process, as you can have on different ones of these formats that you can use, like Zoom or Hangouts or Skype, and be ready to use different ones. In that case, I had them talk to the moderator there who could hear them. They also put down their questions on the chat. I read the chat, repeated their question, and could respond to them. So in the grief process, I think it really encapsulates the trauma, but you're also talking about these overlays. So there's the current situation and the overall world situation that you have to address at the same time. I also wanted to add some hints on working with first responders, the reality of their being hit by grief reaction over and over. EMS is seeing this constantly. The bodies bring someone in, they may not even make it there. There's a lot of this happening, so they're being pounded by this, and keeping that in mind when you are addressing folks on a regular basis. But in the heroic phase, as was brought out by George and Victor from ICISF before, is very much in place, and there's a delayed impact over time that is extended just because of the extended impact of the virus. So think about a range of ways that you can impact people. Keep in mind that resilience, I always use that in these presentations too, and the exposure that they're having on a repeated basis. And that's basically it. And be ready to adapt for any situation. I know you already do that anyway, but use whatever format you can to bring them in and make that connection as best you can. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. And your point is well taken about being flexible on how you do things. And I wanted to comment on the technology. People get very frustrated with, oh, the technology's not working, we can't get in, or the voice goes a little bit shaky or comes in and out. And think about what a blessing this technology is, as difficult as it can be. 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to do this. We would all be talking on telephones and have much less resources to work with. So as you go through this, try to maintain a perspective that, it is hard getting these technologies to work right when you're dealing with different technologies from day to day, and the internet is getting overloaded and your home connections are getting overloaded, but it's still far better than what we used to have. And I think that as time goes on, these technologies are going to improve, and our approaches to using them are going to be much smoother and more effective, because I think it will enhance the work that we do. So with that, I'll go to the next slide. And Sergeant Chuck Hart is running a support program for the Baltimore County Police Department. And Chuck has been involved with critical incident work for a long time. And Chuck and I were talking about the program that Baltimore County Police has set up for their officers. And I thought it was amazing. So I asked Chuck if he would share how they're reaching out to their officers. A lot of this is face-to-face, and I didn't want this presentation to just be virtual support, but also face-to-face support. So Chuck, I'm turning it over to you. Chuck, are you there and unmuted?
Can you hear me, Rick?
Now we can.
Okay, good. All right, so good morning, folks. So when this whole pandemic spun up and they instituted the Incident Command System in Baltimore County, our chief wanted part of the safety section of the ICS, and it created a wellness group. And with that, we now have 4 full-time officers that are, and I make 5, that we deal with strictly wellness issues pertaining to our folks in the field. We're working from 9 to 5 and from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m., 7 days a week. What we're out there doing is this is for all members, including spouses, significant others, family members. We're using our observation and our empathetic listening skills to provide guidance, resource referral, rumor control, safety tips, and provide stress mitigation strategies with the folks that we're meeting. Now, our roll calls are no longer within the precincts. They are not even outside anymore. They're by email. So what we do is try to do site visits to all our different precincts, including headquarters, and we're maintaining contact with the folks that are working distantly from our professional staff. We're doing check-ins with them, as well as any member that we have that's been impacted by the COVID-19 or our quarantined officers. So we're constantly in touch with these folks, and we're also delivering some food when needed. Any type of needs that they have, we're actually kind of like liaison between us and management for some suggestions and so forth. And actually what we've seen is the increase in peer support. So folks are now that have never really reached out are now reaching out and taking advantage of that. We also, as an agency, every evening, our public information officer puts out a nightly message, and it contains, it's broken down into all different areas. But we do have a safety and wellness thing, so we provide tips on how can you work out at home, say what are some of the actual things that you can do to mitigate your stress from working from a distant location. So any type of safety tips, they're incorporated into a nightly message.
Can you share, what kind of challenges you're encountering that would not violate any privacy?
Well, be honest, it's a lot of the fear, especially with the folks that are now encountering people that are persons under investigation. That's one of the big things. Having, the faith in the equipment and your training and confidence in yourself to be able to handle these type calls. We've pretty much been able to reduce some of the anxiety that goes with that, as well as going home and contaminating, maybe possibly taking that home, to especially if you're a caregiver for a vulnerable adult or for your children that have some pre-existing health conditions. So that seems to be one of the big things that we have had to work with.
And that's also true for you, right?
Yeah, we're still out. We're still out in the field meeting with our folks. Now we do this. We're adhering to the 6 foot and wearing our face coverings and so forth. But one of the neat things is when we're out on night shift, is some of our folks, the wellness folks, will just get on the channel and send out a message. Hey, wellness folks are on your channel. We're at this location if you want to stop by and say hello. Or, hey, let's just have a quick rally and let's have an open discussion. So there's some open discussion, which sometimes can lead right to just a individual peer-to-peer. And then some of the individuals we're meeting with need that resource referral and go into the clinical arena.
And are you finding that people are responding and taking advantage of it?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've really seen some really good results, and you're welcome now. And it's more embraced that okay, yeah, we do need to talk to people. So we're slowly chiseling away, at breaking the stigma to peer support and or clinical support.
Well, I think it's wonderful, Chuck, that what you're doing and what your department has embraced. And we've got people from all over listening in, and hopefully they'll take it back to the organizations that they work with, because it really does support the personnel. And if you can reduce that anxiety even just a little bit, and if people feel supported, that makes a huge difference. One of the things we're finding in our work with healthcare organizations, to the extent that staff feels like their leaders care and are trying to do their best, it helps to reduce some anxiety. Not nearly enough, but it does make a difference. So thank you for that, and thanks for sharing it. I think everybody that's listening is probably thinking, wow, these are great. And hopefully other departments are doing similar and different things and can share those as well. So I'm going to go on to the next slide, but thank you very much, Chuck.
Welcome.
Before we get to participant suggestions and experiences, I want to skip that slide for a second. I'll go right back. I wanted to share some helpful hints in doing the video piece. Most of them have already been mentioned, but this one, check the background in your video images. People have funny things in their offices. Eric had given me for my birthday this plaque, and it's pretty benign. And it was on the shelf behind me on the desk, and I took it down just because I thought, it isn't quite professional enough. Sorry, Eric, but I'll put it back up after we're done with these.
I hope so.
Yes, have an opening. It's on a different shelf. Have an opening statement available so that you can get things going and quickly get to the point. Make sure you thank people for what they're doing, and also have lists of stress management approaches handy. It's easy to have resources. Typically, if we're doing a face-to-face debriefing, we don't have anything in front of us. We have to memorize all the steps, and here we can have lists of stress management approaches. So as somebody says, what do I do with this? If you're not real good at ad-libbing, you can look at the list and pull something up and share it. Have resource lists available that can be sent to people or just shared through the sharing feature. And then if you're, and Chuck pointed this out, practice safe distancing when providing face-to-face support. It's not always the ideal, but we do the best we can. So now I'm going back to the other slide, and I want to open this up to what others are doing and what your experiences have been. And so I'm going to turn my sharing off so that I can see what's happening as well, if I can figure out how to do that.
Hey, Rick, it's Mustafa from MIMS. If you go to the bottom right of, after you're done, yeah, exactly, once you get to that screen, if you want to go back to Google, and it actually already automatically ended the presentation. So, Rick, I don't know how best you'd like to do this. I'm thinking that folks can just unmute themselves. It's not a large group. Anyone that has any suggestions or comments can unmute themselves and they can go one at a time.
Exactly. So just jump in.
Hi, Rick, it's Victor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just one other thing to add to the list. We did a quick webinar with the fire department with Anne Arundel, and the content of it was questions. They sent out an email polling people what they'd like to discuss or have discussed. And we used just a question and answer format for about 5 or 6 questions. I think it only took like 10 minutes, but they're planning on doing it weekly just to have, it's not quite a CMB, but just to have reminders, answering questions and building in reminders about stress management and resilience and the resources.
Great. Thank you, Victor.
Rick, Eric Bonney again. Also, I want to emphasize, even with what George and Victor did before, the importance in getting to administration and getting them on the resilience level and support level that you'd like for the individual or the team you're working with, and try to get everybody on the same page. I also want to add, my big issue is I love handing something to people when they're there for them to look at, carry home. And that's why I like to, if there's something we can put up video-wise so you don't have the paper transfer, they can look at, write down what they need, including those resources that Rick had mentioned too.
Great, thank you, Eric. And I think your point about the administrative buy-in and support is really clearly demonstrated by what Chuck's encountering with his department and with the Westminster Police with Nikki on board to make sure that support and that care of staff is really taken care of. Thank you, Eric.
Hey, Rick, it's Amy. It's Amy again. I want to also just, one of the things I thought about is being mindful when we have this hybrid approach and we have some people on the phone and some people on video, and then of course some people in the room, is remembering that when we present things in the chat room or on video that the people on the phone can't see it. So I just want to, it's something that I have to be mindful of, and we've all had to be mindful of in these kind of platforms, so that we repeat everything, questions in the chat room if people have them, or say them out on the call so that people are getting all the information, or have a format for sending it afterwards. So I just wanted to kind of be mindful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've gotten caught in that too, with not realizing people couldn't see the questions that I was responding to.
Sir, it's Sergeant Greg Harrington, Maryland State Police.
Yes.
So I just wanted to add to the, first of all, thank all of you for what you're doing for your departments. I heard Chuck's brief from Baltimore County. I'm writing notes right now. I'm the military liaison for the state police. Call talking to you from the Eastern Shore here in Queen Anne's County. Just wanted to talk about one subject. We have 5 troopers that are on active duty right now for COVID with the Guard and Reserve. 3 in Maryland, 1 a reservist in Pennsylvania, and 1 that's a New York National Guardsman in New York City working with mortuary affairs. His wife and 4-year-old daughter at home in Kent County. So I wanted to talk about what we do is we go over there and cut the grass and make sure we take care of her and her daughter while he's gone. I know everyone on the phone has National Guard and Reservists activated, either war on terror or with COVID. And the second point is, the one thing Colonel Jones, I talked to him and he said, you did 23 years in the Army. What does the Army use and who do they use? I said chaplains. So I was able to get with just a suggestion we got with Lieutenant Colonel Wortham, who's the Army National Guard chaplain for Maryland. And he did a train the trainer for our Maryland State Police 18 chaplains and talking to them kind of like what the Army chaplain was seeing with his soldiers in Maryland, what they're dealing with stress and at home with families. And then our chaplains have gone out, similar to Chuck, what he talked about, to the barracks and to the field, to talk to the troopers and the civilians out in the field about the stress and what they're dealing with. So that was my point. I just wanted to bring up, I know every one of you has Guard and Reserve. If you want to reach out to me, I can certainly give my number. But keep up the good work, and thanks for letting me brief. Pending your questions, sir, that concludes my briefing.
Thank you so much, and thank you for what you're doing. That's amazing, and it's an inspiration for all of us to think about how we can do even more. So I really appreciate your jumping in with that.
Yes, sir.
This is Mustafa Mims again. If anyone has any comments or questions, you can also type them into the chat, and I'd be happy to read them out for the group. And also a reminder, if you're on the phone and you're unable to mute yourself, it's if you press *6, you'll be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, we've still got some time, so I am looking for some more suggestions and experiences.
I'll throw another one in, Eric Bonney. With everything in the escalation, and as I was saying before, the heroic response and the adrenaline associated, I like to include, when I'm doing an intervention, a relaxation to help bring people down a little bit. They can hear you a little bit better when you do that, but also it'll help them practice it maybe at other places with that relaxation and that calm, cool head as best we can do in the midst of crisis. We do the best we can. So I think it's helpful to include that when you can. That's great, Eric. I like that. And it reminds me of something I meant to put in my helpful hints and forgot. And that is what I like to do is have people share affirmations, or call them sometimes mantras, that they use to get through difficult times, and share them with each other through the chat or through speaking, if that's allowed in the presentation. But then I like to end with talking about looking for the positives and the beauty in the world, even in these difficult times. And that can be really helpful as well. So I think we're both on the same track with that. Now, I did have one more slide to stimulate some discussion. We have a little bit of time, and that is ethical and security concerns. So this is something that's been playing out in real time. There's been concerns about Zoom. I subscribe to Zoom with a professional account, and I've been getting lots of updates on how they're dealing with their security. So if anybody can share their thoughts, experiences and concerns. I know the state is not using
I think it's Zoom. Is that correct? So anybody that wants to jump in, that would be helpful.
Rick, Tom Meany. One of the things that I've used in my Zoom chats is using a password, and it seems to limit any outsiders hacking the group. So that's something that's been helpful, but we haven't had any groups hacked, so I don't know. We just use it as a precaution.
Okay, thanks. There are a couple of questions that popped up. I want to jump to them so we don't miss them. It's more of an administrative question, but how do we rewatch this webinar? That webinar is going to be available, but Mustafa, you could better tell people how to do that than I can.
Absolutely. So we are recording the webinar today, but I do want to give anyone the opportunity that has spoken today. If you don't want to be on the webinar, just shoot us an email. I can put my email in the chat. It's definitely understandable if you don't want your comments on the video. After that, we'll be able to share the link. If you can get me those comments by end of or your concerns by the end of business today, I can sit down with our editor and edit that portion of the video out, and then I'll be able to share a link to Randy, and then we'll go from there.
Yes.
So another comment was, in this time of the pandemic and distancing, I found that we are doing a greater number of what I'm calling crisis concern phone calls with personnel who are either contacting us with concern about a subordinate, self, or colleague. And certainly having your organization watching each other's backs to provide support and to get support for each other is critically important during these times. So other security or ethical concerns?
Hey, Rick, it's Donna up here in Canada.
Hi, Donna in Canada.
Hello, hello. Love you to death, my friend. So good to see you.
Yes.
We use Zoom a lot up here in Canada right now for business and so forth. And what we do is we buy the business app on Zoom. We don't go to the free app because the business app has way more protection. And we also create our own boardrooms. You can create an office space on Zoom virtually so that it looks like you're sitting in a couch, and it has way more features. It has way more protections in it. You can set it for higher security ratings. The free Zoom, or the public Zoom, is not all that safe. So it's worth investing in the subscription to Zoom, and they have better protections. So, and the other thing I was going to mention, it just came over the news this morning. It might lift everybody's spirits here. We have a hospital up here in Western Canada, and it should be on your Fox News station tonight on your news. But anyways, every time somebody comes off a ventilator, all the staff do a happy dance up and down the hallway that are in ICU. And that's now a tradition. And they were just doing another 3 dances this morning in one of our hospitals. And they're not just shuffling up and down the halls, they're actually chucking and jiving. So it's a pretty cool video. So that should lift a bunch of spirit.
Great, thank you, Donna. And comment on Zoom. Zoom, I believe, has extended those security protections to the free Zoom during this period. But I think the professional version is certainly has a lot more precautions in it. There is also, if you're doing individual support with people, there's doxy.me, doxy.me, and the suffix me stands for medical. And it's a virtual office, and it's free for doing individual support. The thing about Doxy is you can get a HIPAA partner agreement from them. because that's assuring that there's protections on security. So that's another thing that is available if you're looking for a platform to use that might be a bit more secure. Okay, I'm going to let others contribute if they'd like.
Hey, Rick, this is Mustafa at MIMS. I just wanted to comment real quick. So two things. Number one, with the Zoom from our cybersecurity folks, one of the concerns that was not necessarily integrated security within the Zoom program, but on the back end, information being leaked by Zoom themselves. Where I'm not advocating for or against, but just keep that information out there. And then also here at MIMS, we utilize Google Hangouts a lot. We do multiple webinars a week for situational awareness for our EMS partners on COVID-19, and we utilize the Google Hangouts platform, which works very well. It's part of the Google Suite that you get when you sign up for a Gmail account. There are different tiers, but the free version does have a very robust Google Hangout platform that's very user-friendly. So I would definitely recommend that, using that as well.
Great, thank you, Mustafa.
Hey, Rick, it's Victor again. One concern that I have hasn't come up yet in real time, but when you're doing a group intervention or even one-on-one remotely, if that person is really distressed or potentially suicidal and they terminate the call or leave, I always worry about stuff like that. In a diffusing or debriefing, we send someone after somebody. And the hybrid model that Nikki and Amy were talking about sounds perfect for that because you have peers in the room. But for those situations where you don't, I'm just encouraging people to think about what resources would they call on locally to address that issue if somebody does leave. If anybody has ideas about that, I'd really appreciate hearing them.
That's a great question, Victor. We've been addressing that with, from the perspective of doing some of the support for organizations. How do we deal with somebody who's suicidal? In some cases, we know who the person is. In a lot of the cases that we're doing, we do know. So we could take the normal processes that we would use, although they might be more difficult to put in place. But with some of these, we don't know who is speaking, particularly if it's a phone number and it's not even fully displayed. So that's a really great question. I hope somebody has some good ideas.
So this is Amy again, and I think you're right. But when you only have a partial display of phone numbers, it becomes really difficult. One of the things we did in another hybrid model was, and Rick and you and Sue were on that one, we did provide our phone numbers, two of our phone numbers, so we could do a FaceTime if somebody left the room, that they could call us. So we did provide our phone numbers for that. If we know who they are and they're in Carroll County or other counties, probably we would ask the mobile crisis team to go out as well, if we knew who they are and how to reach them. That would be another idea. I think the biggest, and we run into this all the time when we get calls. I work at the local behavioral health authority. People call and say, I'm suicidal, I'm very aggravated, and they hang up. And we're like, in this time, luckily, of caller ID, we can probably get them back. But I think it would just be asking anybody else on the call if they know who that person is and how to reach them. I mean, that worst case scenario, of course, would be if nobody has any idea who they are and they disconnect the call. But those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Am I still being displayed?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I accidentally hit something and I thought I lost everybody. I can't see anybody, but that's okay. So we're running short on time. I think it's probably about time to start wrapping it up. Is there anything else anybody would like to share?
Rick, just to say thank you, and this was incredibly helpful.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. I really appreciate people jumping in with their thoughts and ideas, and I want to thank all my co-presenters for at a very late last minute, hey, can you help do this? And everybody said yes and was willing to do it. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share and for the opportunity to learn from everybody. And I want to personally thank everybody for doing what you're doing, because I know all of you are working in very different ways and in multiple hats to provide help with this. So thank you for that, and stay safe.
Rick, thank you very much from MIMS for presenting today. Just a few quick items. There was a question about how we could share the presentation from Victor a couple weeks ago. We'll be able to, if you email, I'll type in my email again. You can email that email. We'll get those presentations out to you. Thank you again, Rick, and your team for presenting today.
You're very welcome.